Formula One is heading back to Shanghai this weekend for the Chinese Grand Prix. A lot has changed since its last visit in 2019, and this will be the first time that the new regulations will be tested at this track. It will also mark the first time that Formula One will have an active Chinese driver contest his home Grand Prix, with the Sauber Zhou Guanyu, who will be hoping to delight the home crowd. The 16-turn, 5.4km track hosted its first race back in 2004 and marks its 16th appearance on the calendar. This weekend also marks the season's inaugural sprint race, the first of 6 this season. Let's take a moment to refresh ourselves with the championship standings. Current reigning champion Max Verstappen leads the championship with 77 points ahead of teammate Sergio Perez. Both of the Ferraris are behind, with Charles Leclerc ahead of Carlos Sainz, followed by the McLarens with Lando ahead of Oscar. In 7th is George Russell, 8th Fernando Alonso, 9th Lewis Hamilton and 10th Lance Stroll in that Aston Martin. Further down, we have Yuki Tsunoda in 11th, Ollie Behrman in 12th, followed by both the Haas in 13th and 14th. The rest of the drivers are yet to score, but could this be the weekend for them to do it? In terms of the Constructors' Championship, Red Bull Racing leads the way with Ferrari not too far behind them. McLaren in 3rd, Mercedes in 4th and Aston Martin in 5th, very close by those 3 teams. In 6th there's RB and 7th is Haas, and Williams, Alpine and Sauber are yet to score. My name is Steph Wentworth, and joining me today we have Haydn Cobb and Alex Kalinauckas. Welcome to you both. How is it going?
All good, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Alex?
Yeah, pretty good. Thanks, Steph. I finally slept through to an alarm this morning after my post-Japanese Grand Prix jet lag rather wrecked my my previous week sleep-wise. Still got 8,000 yen to change. I think that's about £40. So that'll be a trip to some sort of bank at some point today. But yeah, no, all good.
Rolling in it. Love to see it. Well, the Chinese Grand Prix is going to be an interesting weekend, shall we say. The last time that F1 raced here, actually, Max Verstappen had only won 5 races. Toro Rosso still existed. It was Lando Norris, George Russell and Alex Albon's first season in Formula One, and also Charles Leclerc's first season at Ferrari. So I think that gives a bit of an indication exactly how much has changed since we last raced in China, and it's hard to believe that that was all 5 years ago. But the return of the Chinese Grand Prix, Alex, are we happy to see it back on the calendar? It's quite the interesting track.
Track-wise, yes, very happy to see it back. As you said, Steph, it's been quite a while since F1 has visited this layout, and that's really what I'm interested in. I think if you think about the circuit, it's one that layout-wise really favours a driver having a go. If you think of the hairpin at the end of the first sector, then you've got that long back straight, again leading into another hairpin, and we have seen plenty of incidents at this track. Again, the famous one will be Sebastian Vettel, Daniel Kvyat, the torpedo incident back in what would have been that 2016, things like that. So yeah, it is an interesting layout. It's just these things that we're talking about tend to have happened quite a while ago. So, you know, you never know whether that's going to be repeated with the modern cars. Also, as I refer to my notes here, the track layout, incidentally, in terms of literally how it looks, is based apparently on the Chinese Shan character, meaning up above. And if that's wrong, please everyone blame Pirelli, because that was in their press release that I've read this morning.
Excellent. So either providing us a very interesting fact or a highly incorrect one. We shall wait and see. Haydn, how are you feeling about F1 heading back to China this weekend?
Similarly excited to see what the track is like with this generation of cars. It does feel like a lifetime ago, for obvious reasons, that Formula One has raced in China. Yeah, I think we were all in different roles doing different things back in that 1000th Grand Prix that was back in 2019, before the world changed forever. I from memory, I've always enjoyed Formula One when it's been at the Shanghai circuit. Good racing, like you say, there's plenty of opportunities to overtake, and you should feel that it's the same with this current generation of cars. But there's just going to be so many unknowns for us, and especially for the teams and drivers. Of course, the majority of the grid has at least some experience of the track, but there'll be a handful of drivers obviously have never raced there. But in terms of how the cars behave, in terms of how the tyres behave, in terms of a lot of things, we're going to find out from basically Friday practice and go from there, really.
Yeah, I feel it's very important to note again that there has been this 5-year hiatus. Is there any possibility, Haydn, that the teams can utilise the data that they've had previously from the last time we ran around China, or is it the fact that there's this new regulation, the new track surface? Will that data not be any use anymore?
Yeah, I'm certainly not an engineer or would go into the details of that. I wouldn't confess to know that exactly, but I think it's fair to say that a lot of the historical data in terms of tyre life, tyre deg, and that will be not that relevant because the tyre compounds have changed and developed over time. They're a different construct of tyres, and they're bigger tyres than they used last time they were there. So, in terms of what's relevant, sure, braking points and obviously the way the track goes. But even Pirelli themselves have said it is a bit of a step into the unknown to them because they've not been able to send anyone in advance to re-examine the track, look at the track surface, where the bumps are, how the behaviour of the surface will be over the race weekend. We expect it to be incredibly green because it's not a circuit that's used that regularly over the course of a year. Formula One tends to be its only major championship that goes there previously. So on Friday it's probably going to be slippy, dusty, dirty. That'll probably be a complaint of the drivers, but there's not a lot anyone can really do about that given what they're up against. So it is a step into the unknown. I feel like the general gist of how to perfect a lap of the Shanghai circuit will be there, but how to then enact that and deliver it will be a bigger question.
I think it's the green track surface that's going to be key, as Haydn says, because basically this track I don't think has been used at all since 2019. Like its FIA grade whatever status lapsed. They had to I think last year had to get people in and inspect everything, and various changes had to be made, which we're going to come on to. So that's going to be really key because it basically means there's just no rubber on the surface, and how that then interacts, even like historical stuff laid down in the surface, let alone other categories, it's just not going to be there. So how that interacts with the tyres, which the teams already are pretty open about saying, look, if the slightest things in terms of conditions change, various little elements can really put even a very clever, very sophisticated Formula One team out of whack. So that's really going to be interesting. I mean, the teams at least will know the corner types. Again, we'll come on to what the teams were saying in Japan about who that might favour or who that might potentially hurt. But yeah, it's more sort of, the fact that it's a sprint weekend as well complicates everything. So yeah, it's certainly going to be a lot of questions that need answering for all the teams quite early on this weekend.
Alex, you actually just alluded to it in kind of talking about who's potentially going to be coming out on top this weekend. What sort of track characteristics are there and who do they favour?
So it's one of the rather rarer front limited circuits that's on the F1 calendar. So in theory, that's a real big boost to Ferrari because we know that's something that Red Bull particularly struggles with historically. Struggled a little bit about that in Melbourne because what that generally leads to is front tyre graining, and that's something that the current generation of Red Bull cars is considering overall it's still a massively strong car and everything's relative, but that is what sort of consistently seen as like a bit of a weak point for it, and a strength of the Ferrari because Ferrari's historical strength has been keeping the rear tyres alive, and that's what the RB19, the RB20 do so well. So yeah, in theory, this boosts Ferrari, as does the fact that the temperatures for F1 races, we think this is a championship that famously chases the sun. You're regularly racing in conditions sort of high 20s into the mid 30s degrees Celsius. The long-term, the forward-looking weather forecast for this race has it at the sort of low 20s, even on race day, sort of a peak there. So again, in theory, that helps Ferrari because we've seen the cooler races. Again, Melbourne is a great example, and obviously Ferrari won that race. Think back to Las Vegas in 2023, or that was rather more of an extreme example of lower temperatures. Again, that helps Ferrari. But the thing that makes this rather more complicated is obviously this track has got very, very long back straight. It's got quite a long pit straight, and there's other straight sections and high speed elements that should, in theory, also boost the Red Bull because we know how good that is in terms of its aero efficiency. So again, it's always the hope that gets you. But this, in theory, as I keep saying, should be hopefully a more interesting race weekend than perhaps we've become accustomed to, and particularly was the case in Japan.
Yes, there are many different factors that will enter the Grand Prix weekend. One of those being strategy. Haydn, could you kind of talk us through what we expect would be the top strategy and maybe the tyre situation this weekend?
Sure. So Pirelli have gone with their middle range of their compounds, C2, 3, 4. and then saying that I think it was a case of them playing safe, knowing that the C5 or the softest compound was going to struggle to be that much use around a circuit that takes a lot of energy through the tyres. Whereas C1 probably could be one of those that if it is too cold, probably many teams might struggle to fire up at all, or it would just go on and on and on. So having that flexibility of the middle range will certainly help. Strategy-wise, I think a lot of teams are going to have to base a huge amount on simulations, because as we've said, and we'll come on to in a bit, they're going to have one practice session to effectively try and figure it all out in terms of the track. Because of the sprint format, they go straight into qualifying after that 1 hour of practice on Friday. And to get through 3 compounds of tyres, knowing how long that soft tyre in this range would last, and therefore impact of how it would look in terms of what strategy predictions, it could sway either way. And again, you've got to factor in that it will be a very green and dirty track at the start of the weekend, whereas it will rubber in. So with the sprint race, with the Grand Prix itself, it's probably a harder one to call than they probably got for the entire calendar, with the exception of like a brand new track that no one's ever been to, because it effectively is like a brand new track to so many teams right now.
Yes, it will be interesting to see how that first practice session goes ahead of the weekend, which is jam-packed full of sessions ahead of that. As we said, the weekend sees the return of the sprint races, but the format has changed a little bit. Hayden, again, could you just kind of take us through what those changes are for the sprint for this season?
Sure thing. So your familiar free practice, one and only one, happens on Friday, which is your standard, nothing to worry about there. Then it changes back to, we have not Grand Prix qualifying, but sprint qualifying on Friday as the second session. So that'll be afternoon in China, but if you're in the UK or in Europe, it'll still be early morning, but at 8 a.m. And that'll be still the condensed version of qualifying. So there's the shorter sessions, but still your 3 rounds of knockouts and going from there. Then we have the sprint race on Saturday morning in China. So if you're in the UK, that'll be a 4 a.m. Sprint start, which I'm not quite sure how many viewers they'll get from you. But again, Formula 1's a worldwide sport. It'll benefit other regions in terms of TV time. Sprint race, that is largely, in terms of its format and its length, hasn't changed too much. We have a winner, and obviously the points format itself hasn't changed from last year. And then on the Saturday afternoon, we basically revert to what would be a normal race event format, with normal qualifying with its regular Q1, Q2, Q3 format of the same length that we'd regularly see, and then Grand Prix on Sunday. It's the changes to make it a bit more of a flowing weekend. It helps with various there'll be the 2 park fermes, one after the sprint race, and obviously between practice and sprint qualifying. So therefore teams will have a little bit more freedom to make the changes if they get it wrong set up, which again is not an impossible thought to have over the sprint weekends. They have that second chance going into Grand Prix qualifying and then the Grand Prix itself. Yeah,
the park ferme changes is the most interesting element of it, really. But there is a big downside, which is that, let's take, for example, the 2022 Brazilian Grand Prix, like I said, as an example, where Red Bull did seem to get his tyre calculations wrong, was beaten in the sprint race by Mercedes and George Russell, and then it played into the Grand Prix. We'll never know quite how that would have shaped out because of Verstappen and Hamilton running into each other. But basically, if Red Bull has got it wrong for the sprint race, it now has the opportunity to get it absolutely right for the Grand Prix, and that's the one that still most people care about. It's got the potential. It's got the potential to be a more logical, flowing event, but there's a big downside in that it could potentially make the Grand Prix lose that element of jeopardy that sprint races were supposed to add.
Well, the drivers have been very vocal in the past about how they feel about the sprint races, namely current world champion Max Verstappen has not held back in his comments. What have the drivers, Alex, had to say about these changes this year? Is there a positive response?
It's more what Max Verstappen was saying at the Japanese Grand Prix. It was more sort of the fact that the first sprint race is happening at a race that hasn't been on the calendar for so long. So he was saying, it's not very smart to do that. So it's just part of his ongoing and frankly, I think wonderful campaign against sprint races. I'm very much against sprint races. I also just like the fact that Max Verstappen speaks his mind, and it's something that Liberty Media, obviously F1's commercial rights holder, would very much not like him to be saying because they're so keen on it. And I kind of get why. Like, they are basically saying, look, we bring in more TV numbers, bigger viewership worldwide with a sprint race rather than a practice session. So it kind of makes business sense. I get that. It's just I'm very much more of a traditionalist, and I really don't see the appeal of sprint races at all. That said, a lot of the exciting stuff I do recognise. Think, for example, 2021. The British Grand Prix wouldn't have happened without a sprint race and Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton colliding there. So, of course, there are two sides to every debate, but I'm much more in camp Verstappen than anybody else. And then in terms of just, again, more specific Japanese Grand Prix driver complaints about the sprint race, Carlos Sainz again highlighting the fact that with only one practice session, there's a bit of jeopardy for the teams in terms of what we saw at the US Grand Prix last year. And that's how a bumpy track surface can mean that the teams are in danger of, running their cars too low, wearing the planks out, and then getting disqualified. Obviously, it's happened to Hamilton and Ferrari's other driver, Charles Leclerc, at Austin. The bumps have been resurfaced on the pit straight. We're told the slight struggle is that the drivers, especially Sainz, seem to be a little bit unsure exactly how much had been resurfaced at the track. So if there's a little bit more, that they weren't expecting, that could potentially alter things. But in theory, by removing those bumps, that should aid the sort of plank wear jeopardy, if that makes sense, for this weekend.
And based on kind of all that you've just said, who do you actually think that the track suits the most? Who do you think is going to end up towards the front? We've talked about Ferrari potentially being right up there. Is there a chance that they could be challenging the Red Bull? I
would expect so. I mean, again, it's all relative. Like, the Red Bull is clearly the class of the field. If they get everything right, there's no reason to expect them not to win. We just know that these historical things that happen with tyres, Red Bull is as fallible as any other team in terms of occasionally getting things wrong. I always think, the 2021 Turkish Grand Prix and the wet weather there, Valtteri Bottas comprehensively defeating a wet weather master in Max Verstappen. It all came down to the tyres and a changed track surface. So it is possible, but the Red Bull is just so mighty. It's not logical to predict anything other than them being the favourite. But the conditions and the layout should favour Ferrari, as we've said. The cooler conditions also should help Mercedes. Now, I know they sort of were saying in Japan they've made a fair bit of progress in terms of understanding why the car changes so much when the conditions are hotter. But it being cooler, you would expect that in theory to boost them. What I will say is that in terms of who might not do so well, McLaren in Japan very much saying a lot of slow corners, those hairpins that we've talked about, the opening turns that just go on and on and on to the right and then again to the left, spending a long time at low speed. McLaren's really worried. Again, there's a caveat there. There were lots of times last year they said they were going to be terrible and they were absolutely brilliant. So yeah, we'll see what happens there.
And Haydn, what about some of the other teams? We've got teams like Williams and Aston Martin with their straight line speed. Could this track kind of favour them? Might we see them kind of overtaking the McLarens and doing a better job this weekend?
Well, with that one, I would be surprised. And I think that, like Alex says, I think, sure, McLaren probably don't expect themselves to be, I think, fighting at Red Bull and fighting Ferrari, but I would still assume they'd be in that front bunch of, your Mercedes and your Astons. In terms of that midfield fight, it seems to rotate every couple of weeks. The AlphaTauri on the whole has appeared to be, at least over those first four races, the slight head of that pack, and they've certainly maximised their opportunities with Tsunoda in recent races especially. And I feel like that, again, is looking good. They're in good form. The car, at least in Tsunoda's hands, looks like it's behaving well. I think it's bound fair on Ricciardo, given he only did a few hundred metres in Japan. But again, it all depends on how that front five teams battle it out. If any of them hit trouble, obviously like Stroll that we've seen in recent races or qualifying low down the order, that then opens up the positions that really matter to them. Granted, we know that classifications can be done on countback of most 11th places, most 12th places, but I think if you're asking all those teams, when does it really matter and when do they really want to strike, is when those point positions become available. And that hypothetically, if it doesn't become available at China, even though there's technically two shots at it with the sprint, it's sort of well done for finishing 11th, but it means nothing until you get your opportunity and you go for it. But you never know. And equally, there's a home driver that now we're getting onto that hasn't had the greatest starts to the season for a couple of reasons, a couple of faults his side. This is Zhou, of course, a couple of faults on his side, but the team has themselves struggled a fair bit with pit stops, with the car as well. Hasn't been quite up to standard to fight for decent positions. So yeah, maybe this is what he needs, but I'm sure there'll be a hell of a lot of pressure coming into him this weekend from fans, from home support, from sponsors, from the team itself, because this is probably one of the races they really want to put on a good show.
Absolutely. And Haydn, to be fair, you segued onto that beautifully. Zhou Guanyu is contesting in his home Grand Prix. Alex, do you think that the points are maybe a step too far? Sauber is not, for the past couple of races, has not been one of those midfield teams that's kind of up there. They have struggled at the beginning of this season. Could this be the race where they turn it around?
Yeah, so the elephant in the room is obviously, as Haydn mentioned, the just shocking pit stops that Sauber have had with, the changes that they made for this year just backfiring massively. The team was saying in Japan they expect this is going to be ongoing for at least a little while. I'm sure they'll be hoping that they've got a permanent fix for it at this race, but if not, at least they came back onto the right foot. They had to have naturally very conservative pit stops. I know, again, we're talking sort of 4 or 5 seconds, which seems incredibly fast, but obviously in comparison to what the top squads are doing at sub 2 second pit stops, it seems like it's taking an age. But yeah, actually Sauber, to be fair, insisted it had the pace to be in the points fight in Melbourne. Again, we're talking about the track type, the front limited things, the cooler temperatures, all playing that together. Valtteri Bottas, of course, goes very well in Australia for obvious reasons. But yeah, so in theory, you'd say there's potential for them. But yeah, I just think with Zhou in particular, it's really, really important that even if Sauber, just car-wise, is having a shocker or there's more pit stop problems or whatever, so long as he himself is maximising absolutely everything and showing it really clear for the team that he's really leading the way, that's absolutely pivotal for him. If that can be combined with a points run, absolutely fantastic, because he was talking at a team season launch I went along to at the Guildhall in London back in February. He was saying that the app, the website's crashed in terms of ticket sales for the grandstand that sort of his, it's all branded as the Zhou grandstand. It sold out within minutes. People were struggling to even get access into buying tickets there. And that's going to be really important, because if he can combine, the sort of the obviously the obvious love and the expectation that his home fans will have with a brilliant result, that really is something to flag to Audi, which is coming for 2026 to take over Sauber, because Audi's been very open in the fact that it just doesn't sell enough cars in China, particularly that electric vehicle market. So, the potential of having a Chinese driver who's doing well really could be quite lucrative for Audi. And we know we've got an issue of Autosport magazine coming out this week, the very, very complex driver market, the major potential that there could be huge change at Sauber because both its drivers are out of contract. So many other drivers are out of contract elsewhere. Basically, what I'm getting at is this is a really big opportunity for Zhou. And, he's not done too badly. I think if you look back at his F1 career so far, it's not like Bottas has blown him away. And we know Bottas is a very good driver. He's not he's really, really decent. So, yeah, again, like I said, if Zhou can just show really well this weekend, do what he can, what's in his control, it'd be a really good sign for him looking forward to his F1 future.
Exactly. It's a big weekend for Zhou, big weekend for all of the drivers, really, on a weekend that is going to be more unpredictable than most. And I, for one, am very excited to see it get underway. Guys, I want to thank you very much for your time, and I want to remind everybody watching that the sprint qualifying is on a Friday with the sprint on the Saturday morning. Just beware of that format. Remember, if you have enjoyed this video and you've liked what you've seen, please subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with our coverage of the F1 2024 season, and we will see you in the next one.